Welcome to our webinar series, Spotlight on Structured Literacy. My name is Lama Farhan, and I serve on the IDA Georgia Board of Directors, and I'm the chair of the webinar committee. On behalf of the boards of both IDA and the Reading League Georgia, we are pleased to be offering this webinar series for the 5th year. IDA and the Reading League are committed to providing information on evidence-based practices to educators, parents, and advocates. In doing so, we hope all students will have access to structured literacy instruction. In this 5-part series, our speakers draw on the science of reading and the science of the teaching of reading. In tonight's webinar, Dr. Charlie Haynes will discuss how writing and comprehension are deeply interconnected processes that can be strengthened through systematic instruction at the word, sentence, micro-discourse, and text levels. This session provides hands-on strategies to support oral and written language across these levels. After a brief overview of key research and theory, the focus shifts quickly to ready-to-use classroom, small group, and one-on-one techniques. Participants will also receive handouts, including teacher-friendly articles authored by Dr. Haynes. Before we begin, thank you to those who submitted questions when you registered for this webinar. As a reminder, if you have other questions, please put them in the chat box. The chat will be monitored this evening by Elizabeth Hogan, President of the Reading League Georgia. During the Q&A, our speaker will address as many of your questions as time allows. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Charlie Haynes, Professor Emeritus at the MGH Institute of Health Professions, is a pioneer in language-based curricula for children with dyslexia and expressive language challenges. His cross-linguistic research spans English, Japanese, Arabic, and Portuguese, and he is the author of From Talking to Writing, Strategies for Supporting Narrative and Expository Expression. He has been honored by the International Dyslexia Association for both the Margaret Byrd Rawson Lifetime Achievement Award and the Legacy Award for his enduring contributions to the field of dyslexia and related language learning disabilities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Charlie Haynes.
Thank you so much, Lama. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm ostensibly talking about strategies for supporting writing and comprehension, but I have a really strong emphasis on the kind of interrelatedness of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and that will become immediately evident, I think. I just want to thank Drs. Farhan, as well as Elizabeth Hogan, and a number of the other members of the IDA Georgia branch and the Reading League. I also want to acknowledge Sue Smith, Leslie Laud, and Peter Harris. A few of their slides we've co-presented together many times, and a few of their slides are in here as well, and just want to recognize them. So I am going to be drawing from Jennings and Haynes, From Talking to Writing, as well as a couple of other articles that I've written with colleagues. From a theoretical point of view, I'll emphasize the kind of reciprocal and interactive interrelationships of these different modalities of language. And then we'll talk a lot about multimodal, topic-centered, structured literacy techniques and strategies that support comprehension and writing. I'll say, I'll tell you what it is and why a topic-centered approach is important. The structured approach is extremely important as well, and I believe that that they can be complementary, and I hope that I'll illustrate why. So why is a focus on strategies for text macro structure helpful, but not enough? That'll be a kind of key question. That'll be a sort of through line that you'll see. The strategies supplement text macro structure focus. Then I'll, share these strategies at the word, sentence, and what I call micro-discourse. It's like 2 and 3 sentence chunks. I've appended at the end of the handout that you'll receive a number of references, as well as strategies, kind of lesson plans for RTI tiers 3, 2, and that last one shouldn't say 3, it should say 1 for classroom RTI MTSS. So we all know, many of you are speech language therapists, I know, and many of you are reading professionals with strong backgrounds in oral language. But we know that these modalities interact with one another all the time. That when we write, we're drawing heavily from what we've read. It helps to clarify for us what we've read. And when we read, we're kind of composing in our minds as we read. We're building knowledge structures and questions and so on, as you all know. And similarly, when we speak, we're drawing on what we've taken in through listening. And when we listen, it's not unusual for us to engage in kind of internal speech or discussion with ourselves as we kind of consult. So these modalities all interact. Students can rehearse language before they write it down. We all just developmentally listen to stories before we read them. And then we listen, as we get older, we listen to expository texts that help us hear the text that we're reading. All of these modalities inform internal language. Vygotsky talked about the really important role that language use and understanding have in shaping cognition, as well as this kind of very internal form of language. Most of you have seen Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. I've adapted it. I'm sure she wouldn't object. She's a friend and colleague. I've adapted it to also include expression and spelling as well. And you can see the various components of language and knowledge that underlie both comprehension and expression, as well as for word recognition and reading, and word recognition and spelling, these sort of core component elements of those. And again, when we write or when we read, we're drawing on underlying language as well as our word recognition and sort of orthographic knowledge. And over time, it weaves together so that we become more strategic and automatic in both our reading and our writing. So some key principles is that as we grow up, we learn language through listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And I wanted to add that for people who are deaf from birth, they're learning language through manual sign, and that's informing their internal language. So it's helpful to think about the modalities in which people are drawing on and how those interact with internal language. One thing that I've found over 30 years of practice, 40 years now, that when we practice in and across modalities, that's shaping not just internal language, but again, cognition. And I've found that when I draw on multiple modalities in my teaching, that it tends to cement knowledge better, language knowledge better in my students. So many of you are familiar with this sort of, I call it text macro structure. If you're familiar with Steve Graham's wonderful work on writing, a core element of self-regulated strategy development is these kind of text macro structure strategies. In this case, I'm giving you an example of TIDE, but you may use TREE or you may have other acronyms that basically scaffold this kind of classic expository paragraph with the T standing for topic, the I standing for important pieces of evidence, the D is your sort of detailed examination or key details supporting your evidence, and then your ending or your concluding sentence. This is classic. It's a powerful method, and I don't mean to imply that it is not strong and robust in its effects on children's writing as well as their comprehension, but it's not sufficient. At issue is that there are intra-paragraph issues that we see in our students with dyslexia and related language learning difficulties. Students who younger may be identified as being developmental language disordered as well. So some of the strategies I'm going to share here, I've already kind of enumerated for you. And without further ado, I want to kind of take you into it. I want to explain to you why content or thematic language instruction is powerful, its rationale for it. And then I'll give you a couple of vocabulary level kind of teaching strategies. So here's an example of a non-content centered exercise. Add a where phrase to each sentence. So, and this is nicely structured. It's middle-aged plumber fixed the leaking pipes under the sink. A chrome robot assembled a steel door, maybe you could say in a factory. Hardworking nurse walked down the hospital hallway, maybe. So this is well structured for supporting students' use of where phrases, and I don't mean to imply that it isn't. However, an issue with it is that it results in unlinked activation patterns. If you look at the semantics within each sentence, the vocabulary that are being used, they do not overlap and kind of reinforce one another. So what you're doing is you're activating separate schema and you're not building a larger schematic base. You can contrast that with an exercise like this one that's on an Amish barn raising. Uh, Same general activity, add a where phrase. But key point is that when we do thematic instruction or we're drawing on content or disciplinary knowledge and vocabulary and concepts, that we want to make sure that we provide adequate exposure to students who may not have familiarity. So we need to teach them about what who the Amish are, how an Amish barn raising might work, and some of the vocabulary related to that. And then they can engage in an activity like this. Powerful draft horses carried fresh sawn logs, maybe to the building site. Older teens lifted wooden beams onto joists. That's specific vocabulary related to this larger scheme. Bearded carpenter chiseled notches into the beam. That's a specific word related to this kind of larger schema. So what you get from that is you get related content causing kind of overlapping activation within our brain. And what it's doing is it's reinforcing schema and vocabulary more effectively than non-thematic exercises. It's just a really important point. So here's an example of an oral brainstorming strategy that we did with kids in Charlestown near the Institute. The children were working on a larger theme of contributions of African American artists. And this is Jacob Lawrence, who is a marvelous artist. You can read about him. But it's a picture that has an implied story in it. And then you can guide the students' visual analysis of the complex scene or objects. It's important to do that, and that helps children focus on sort of key elements of what's happening in this kind of pictured story, rather than them identifying irrelevant nouns or verbs. And then we have them brainstorm. They provide typically high frequency words like guy, room, light, table, and verbs they might provide would be words like stands, looks at, makes a picture. And then our job, as you know, is to, once we've kind of activated these kind of internal Velcro vocabulary loops, we provide more specific vocabulary. And what that does by activating their prior knowledge is it gives a place for this new knowledge to live, set, and attach in their minds. So instead of guy, we could lead the child to say, okay, we're talking with the class. We say, what kind of a guy is this? Someone who's holding a paintbrush. It's an artist. Or, yeah, he's standing in a room, but a room where artists work. What is it? What might it be called? And we'd lead them to studio and so on. So this is a kind of classic oral brainstorming activity. You want to make sure and use complex stimuli that have an implied story within them. You can have the students identify nouns and verbs. You record them, and then you add your new vocabulary, and then you can have the students read back what you've written down. Once you've focused on a theme like this and elicited specific vocabulary, those vocabulary get reused in sentences, in micro-discourse, that 2 and 3 sentence level, and in the paragraphs. So all these activities are complement one another, and what they're doing is they're basically taking themes or topical language, and they're providing a sort of structure for how students are learning it. One thing that I like to do very early on is, before I kind of dive deeply into sort of detailed aspects of vocabulary and sentence production with kids, is I want to make sure that we focus on a prompt. So if they're going to be engaging in close reading and we want to support their comprehension, we want to analyze the prompt and then have them convert it into a topic sentence. So what are important activities of spiders, for example? That might be one's theme. And then the response to that is your topic sentence. There are several important activities spiders do. And I've highlighted in red a phrase that students can overlearn when they're at the kind of basic introductory level with an expository paragraph, where they're doing some kind of enumeration or listing. This is a really helpful phrase for them to learn. Then they can become flexible later. So when they engage in close reading, that's looking really carefully at the text. You can say, okay, so what are some verbs that you see here? And over here on the paper to the right, you can see words like protect, hunt, bite, catch. And then we engage the students in identifying synonyms. Like for protect, they might say keep safe or save. Another word for hunt, the student might say chase, and so on. So these synonyms, you're gonna see their importance later. They can be put in word boxes for students, in synonym boxes for students to reference to promote cohesion during their writing. But this is super important work. Here's an example of word boxes that are around with content-centered nouns and verbs. For students who are at a very basic level where the nomenclature or kind of grammatical terms are abstract for them, you can say who, what, did what, instead of noun and verb, who, what, did what. And you always want to make sure and provide an engaging picture. Has perhaps this one has a bit of an implied story to it. And that does a lot to kind of activate and elicit language. So another piece that will often happen, this is for a higher level student who may have difficulty pronouncing multisyllabic words. If we can't pronounce words, we can't own them. We can't engage in effectively in phonetic spelling. So being able to pronounce key multisyllabic words is super important. If I had you in a class with me right now, I'd be having you repeat after me. Maybe in your home or wherever you are, you can repeat. I'll sort of engage you in forward chaining with a multisyllabic word entomologist, which students with dyslexia will sometimes transpose syllables, as you know. They'll leave them out. We'll look at an example of that next, but here's forward chaining. Say en. Say enta. Say entomol. Say entomola. Entomologist. So that's forward chaining. Backward chaining is in the reverse. Forward chaining rehearses the first part of the word more. Backward chaining rehearses the latter part of the word more. If you do backward chaining, though, in order to support your working memory, you want to make sure and have those words written down and maybe even have them chunked because it's very hard to backward chain multisyllabic words on the spot. So here's where you really tap and exploit the value of chaining. If the target word is entomologist and the child is spelling cryptically, like they might say entomonist or something like that, where they're leaving out syllables or not giving correct vowel sounds, they can't engage in phonetic spelling that is decipherable. So, as Virginia Berninger noted, spelling difficulties are one of the key obstacles to written expression. It's the kind of front end obstacle. And so when a student can't spell a word, it's not unusual for them to just use a higher frequency, shorter word that is less precise and does not support their internal language. So we want to engage them in, teach them a phonetic spelling strategy that exploits the knowledge they learn through forward or backward chaining. So we might say, how many syllables in entomologist? Entomologist. They do one line for each syllable, and then they spell it. They spell the sounds that they hear in each syllable. And this might actually be the spelling that the student produces, but we know the word that they mean, and we can provide the correct spelling. I'm not implying that we should not engage in systematic, structured spelling instruction. Maybe with a higher level student, we'd actually be working on things like roots and affixes, as would be the case here. But for the student who is not at that level, this is a really good strategy for getting words on the page and not avoiding them. Many of you have engaged in semantic mapping before. Here's an example of, I like I don't mind free mapping for children who are having trouble coming up with any kind of associations with core words. But as soon as possible, I try to engage them in structured mapping. And in a moment, I'll show you why. So for a word like rudder, maybe our theme is sailing in the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. Um, we might ask who uses a rudder. By the way, if you're not a sailor, a rudder is the kind of a board or tiller at the rear of the boat that you use for steering. Who uses it? A captain. What's its function or use? It steers the boat. What's it made of? Where is it located? These are examples of core semantic features of the word rudder. Now, many people kind of stop right here, but I want to show you a really important link between semantic feature analysis and sentence writing. Um, when we do semantic feature analysis, if we do it well in a structured way like this, then students can exploit semantic features for their sentence production. So, for example, at a very basic level, you can see how the features captain and steering the boat are directly support production of the sentence, the captain steered the boat. At the next level, students start to become a little bit more flexible, but you can still see those semantic features reappearing and being repurposed within this environment. The captain steered the rudder in the stern of the boat. And then at level 3, when students are at a more advanced, compound, complex sentence level, you can see that they repurpose the features much more flexibly, but those same semantic features are still emerging in that environment as well. I'd like to move on to content-centered sentence development. At the very beginning, for young students or students who struggle a great deal with language, we want to first make sure that they have a sense of a sentence. So we might ask them, is ants helped a sentence? And students might raise their hands and you can ask them, well, why is that a sentence? Why do you think it is? And often they'll say something like, well, the something is doing something. It's it gives me a picture of what ants do. And if we ask them whether soldier ants is a sentence, they might say, well, you got like these ants, but they're not doing anything. And so they won't use words like, subject and predicate or noun and verb, but they're giving you the idea that they have the sense of a sentence. And that's something to build off of when we introduce either rudimentary language for describing grammatical parts. Maybe we're doing who did what, or who what did what, or we're doing noun, verb, or we're doing subject, predicate. But all of these concepts sort of build and link with each other. So here's an example of how one might kind of link this writing and comprehension piece. You have the student looking at sentences on the left and they're reading them. And you can see the student has actually written W for who, what, and DW, did what. To the right of it, you have a kind of monitoring rocket. Does it have a capital? If so, fill in the top stage. Does it have a noun or a who? Fill in the next stage. Does it have a verb or a did what? Next stage. And then the bottom of the rocket would be the end punctuation. So this is a kind of receptive activity in a reading modality. To the right, you can see an expressive activity in a writing modality. Uh, Same idea. Here, the student is sort of stuck with the word spiders. I might ask them to use other nouns, but for this purpose, it works. And then it's who did what. And again, they're monitoring to make sure that they have an initial capital, end punctuation, as well as a noun and a verb. And here's that sort of rocket ship self-monitoring. Did I provide an initial capital? Fill in the top stage. Did I provide a noun, subject noun? Next stage. Did I provide a verb phrase? If so, fill it in. Did I provide final punctuation? Yep, fill it in and blast off. The rocket's able to take off. This is a fun self-monitoring tool. You can use it in students like uh, uh, in first grade, second grade, maybe even third grade, depending on their needs. So I like to follow a sentence hierarchy. This is based on work that I did with D. Tyack and Bob Gottlieb out at Scottish Rite Institute for Childhood Aphasia. And I basically adapted the developmental information that we gathered from over 100 children's language samples and then tried to adapt it to a classroom environment. So here are a number of simple sentences, again, all thematic in nature, all the way down to adjective, noun, verb, where or when. Uh, just a quick point when you're doing descriptive language, noun, verb, adjective, as soon as possible, you want to have them prepose the adjective in front of the noun. That allows right word expansion. So when students are writing, you want to have them rehearse, subvocalize on their fingers, whatever the pattern is that they're doing, just one word for each finger, and then they can share it out. When you have 20 or 30 children in a classroom, it helps to do subvocalizing rather than create this kind of noise of 30 children orally rehearsing. Another piece that we found is really important is that after students are accurate with a sentence pattern, it's very helpful to engage them in sentence slams. Daryl Datchuk has done a number of uh, studies with small numbers of participants, but interesting studies looking at the effects of engaging children in these sentence fluency activities. What I like kind of in addition to this, so you have them write as many sentences as they can within 3 minutes. You can use that to monitor their progress over time. How many sentences are they doing? Uh, and so on. Each time you increase the complexity of the sentence, however, you need to set a new baseline, obviously. I have them write noun and verb boxes on their paper to get ready, as well as the letters CP to remind them to start with an initial capital and end with end punctuation. And then here are compound and complex sentence patterns of increasing difficulty, all thematic. After students have mastered at one level, then you're ready to move them up to the next. Then here are a number of complex sentence patterns that are some of the most difficult patterns because they put a heavy load on verbal working memory. So again, you want to teach multimodal, content-centered sentence monitoring and production. Here's an example of how I've done it for listening or reading modality. You put whatever your target pattern is. I'm sticking with simple sentence here just to make my points, but you could have some kind of compound or complex sentence pattern as well. But this is um, the target sentence pattern at the top, optional article, noun, verb, where phrase, plus when phrase. And I might either say or provide the students in writing uh, the sentence, the gulls screeched at dusk. They have to monitor, recognize that there's, in this case, there's an optional article, but there's a noun, subject noun, there's a verb, and there's a time of day, but there's not a where phrase. So they're required to do an X where. Uh, and then you give them immediate feedback. I try not to have a lot of intervening stimuli. Like I don't go through a whole kind of quiz and then come back to it at the end. Right away, you're teaching here. So you want to make sure that you give immediate feedback. Then you can have the student expand the sentence so it's the target sentence. Here's an example of how one might approach this in a speaking or writing modality, again, around this sort of nautical beach theme. You enter the key nouns under the noun column, and then the students can take turns orally producing or writing the target sentence pattern using those thematic or topical nouns. By the way, some of you who may be teaching in middle school or high school, I'm using themes that are very accessible for grade school kids, but you can easily imagine using themes like Romeo and Juliet, or maybe the students are learning about the Magna Carta and all of the circumstances around that. All of these strategies you can use, you can sort of take. They're portable strategies that can be used at a variety of different levels. So, I want to share with you some practice with inner sentence semantic cohesion and detail elaboration. I'm going to move right along. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on narrative and expository discourse because most of you are familiar with narrative frames and expository frames. But it's this intra-paragraph stuff that's the really the rocket science, I think. So uh, I'm going to talk about this micro-discourse. I use that because micro is like a small chunk of a larger piece of discourse. It's carrying meaning across 2 or 3 sentence discourse chunks. So before we jump right into it, I'll illustrate what is a vocabulary use problem that you see in this student's micro discourse. And I've obviously highlighted a word to kind of emphasize to you that I think this was a Yellowstone Park theme. And you see this redundant use of the word bears. And a problem with that is that it makes writing boring, and it also doesn't, and it does not engage the reader, and also doesn't hone the individual's knowledge of synonyms, pronouns, etc. So here's a cohesion circle mnemonic that I have students memorize. Memorization is not evil. Memorization, in fact, can be really useful if it's a strategy and you're checking to see if the student has internalized the strategy and is employing it. So I have them memorize this cohesion circle where you start with the original noun. Maybe it's bears. You come up with a synonym for it. And then the next time it appears in your discourse, you look to see if you're using a synonym. You're not being redundant using the same noun. Then you change it up and use a pronoun. Then you use a synonym. This is to remind students to change up their language. So it means that we need to do some good work with them, creating a kind of synonym slash pronoun box. Here are a number of synonyms for bears. Note that some of them are more than one word. Land mammals, dangerous animals. Also, I include they because they acts as a synonym. It's pronoun. It's in the place of the noun. So you can look at this paragraph here, and I could ask, if we had more time, I'd ask you to identify the times that this proposition here pops up again. And then you would note to me that you see the word grizzlies, it pops up again as they, and then bears, and then dangerous creatures, and then again a pronoun. And it's roughly following this kind of cohesion circle in this case to sort of illustrate that. But this is comprehension. The way that we comprehend, if you're familiar with Kinch and Van Dyke's research, we comprehend by following these sort of threads. There's an initial proposition, and then it pops up again and again, and it's clarified and expanded on. That's what comprehension is all about. So, so another problem is students not providing salient details. You remember the D in the tied paragraph structure. And so we can use a detail circle strategy. First, I'd like to teach it within a narrative environment. So after students have learned a basic sequential narrative, first, then next, after that, finally, might be the rudimentary sequence words that they learn at the very beginning before they become automatic and can change them up. But you make sure they have that. That's the basic level. And then you can introduce they have to memorize these three basic details: a relevant fact sentence, adjective sentence, or a why sentence. And they write that in the margin of their paper to remind them of the kinds of details they can provide. So here's an example of adding a relevant fact. When I'm teaching students, I'll give them a sentence. I'll underline a couple of the key words that I don't want them to, if at all possible, I don't want them to reuse them. And then the student adds a relevant fact detail. The children rake the leaves in the yard is my sentence. And then they add to it. The kids rake them into a large heap. That's a fact. Another relevant fact might be the pile of leaves started to blow all over the yard. And all together, that forms a piece of micro-discourse. It's neat to do this sort of inter-sentence level training with students. It really supports their getting this idea of building cohesion through elaboration. Here's an example of adding a why detail. They can self-prompt for that. Why did whatever the key propositions are in the first sentence, why did they do that? And the answer is a because, maybe a because sentence. The children raked the leaves in the yard because their father was going to pay them. That's an example of embedding explanatory detail within a complex sentence. So it's one sentence, but it's actually a sort of piece of micro-discourse. It's that kind of bridge to multi-sentence level micro-discourse. So I want to just briefly show you application in narrative and expository discourse. So once students have mastered the basic first, then next, after that, finally, then they can do a sort of 3-paragraph piece where the topic sentence is basically providing the setting for the narrative. Last weekend, we went skating with my brother and sister at the park. And the first is we hiked to the park. A detail might be the park is a long distance from our home. And then maybe we're adding an additional detail, but we really wanted to go there because we hadn't skated in a long time. So that's an example of a complex sentence that provides 2 details and so on. Here's an example of a student talking about Halloween celebration, trick-or-treating, and you can see them weaving in. Here's their a topic sentence, and then here's their first, then here's their next paragraph, then, and then next is part of that same paragraph. And then after that and finally are the concluding paragraph. So uh, first I got an example of an adjective detail. First I got into uh, fuzzy Santa costume. Santa costume was a little bit big. Then I went trick-or-treating in my friend Evan's neighborhood. Evan's neighborhood was the size of 7 of my neighborhoods put together, and so on. So then here's an example of kind of uh, moving on to very simple expository paragraph.
Dr. Haynes,
Please,
it's 7:48.
perfect. I think we're right on. Thank you so much, Lama. So the tied structure uh, is the sort of framework here. Here's the kind of, but before we go to the tied with the D in it, we want to make sure that students can do the basic topic sentence, idea one, idea two, idea three, and then ending sentence. So here would be an example. Here's your topic. There are many reasons I like hot dogs. First, they make me think of going to a baseball game. Secondly, I like salty, meaty food. Last of all, they don't cost too much. There are lots of reasons to love hot dogs. So that's your basic rudimentary tie, TIE structure. And then at the next level, you can add a detail to each of those ideas so it conforms more to the kind of classic tied format. And here's an example of the same paragraph expanded out into supporting details. What's neat about working on this kind of paragraph structure when you've done all of this sort of supportive work, paralleling your discourse level work, is that students can much more easily expand. So your introductory paragraph might be a topic sentence uh, uh, and introducing the sort of three main ideas that you're going to talk about. Each paragraph is basically an idea one expanded with details, idea two expanded with details. That's your second paragraph. Idea three expanded with details. And then the ending paragraph sums up the main ideas and gives you a couple of sentences about implications or effects. So here's what we discussed. We talked about reciprocal interactive strategies to support listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And I gave you some examples of sort of word, sentence, micro-discourse, and application to narrative and expository text. The key point is that listening, speaking, reading, and writing, when we can invoke as many of those modalities as possible in our teaching, we do topical or thematic, theme-centered instruction, drawing on thematic vocabulary and concepts. We're providing students with really powerful tools for addressing those sort of intra-narrative or intra-paragraph difficulties that so many of our students experience. So these are liberating strategies for students, and you'll be amazed at how well they do when they incorporate them. So thank you so much. I'm really wish that I was in a room with all of you. I think that Elizabeth is going to sort of facilitate some of our questions. I don't know if you wanted to break in, Elizabeth.
Yes. Hi, I'm here. I didn't want to interrupt because I know many of us are like, we could just keep listening to this. I'm taking curious notes, but thank you so much. I've written down a lot of things. I particularly love, especially in the beginning, I am a teacher trainer and am in schools almost each day. And the hardest thing I think to convey is that multimodal model. And so many curriculums and schools are asking their teachers to just have kids start writing. And it's so hard to get that. They really can't do that writing without speaking it first. And so I just love all the examples of kind of the boxes of, okay, here are who, and then here's the did what did they do. I just think we have to be having those conversations. We have to be starting, even like what you said, with pictures and having those conversations before we can expect kids to be able to write. So that was just such important work. And then I love the specific examples when we have to really get into that tough paragraph writing. I know that you saw some of the questions, so I
Yeah, I
don't
saw
know
some
on
of
your
the.
slide if you had some particular ones that stood out to you.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer a couple of them, and then
Okay.
if there's one that you see in chat
Okay.
that seems to kind of override or stick up its lovely head,
Okay. And
please
I am
feel
looking at the chat. So if anyone would like to add anything as
okay.
Dr. Haynes is talking, please do.
So there were a number of questions that uh, many of you sent in. I picked a few of them, and one that I thought was really interesting is what is the sequence of grade level expectations for writing? And the key point I want to make is that we talk about expectations, but they really vary by state and even by school district. And I know a number of you are coming in from other countries like Chile, China. I saw a number of people who are participating. I think one of them is in one of the participants from China is actually one of my students, so it was great to
Love
see
that.
their name. Um, but the expectations are going to vary from country to country and it kind of and state to state, et cetera, because it depends on what your curricular requirements are. So um, I think that if whatever state or country you're in, you want to look to see if there's some kind of standard expectations. Typically, there are in developed countries. Those are moderately well articulated. But I wanted to just show you what to expect. Like with early writing, kindergarten through first grade, you're going to expect to see students drawing and then telling you verbally what they drew. They may dictate with the teacher writing down what they've said, simple sentences. By the way, don't stop doing that in grade school and even middle school. Writing down what a student says and letting them see it is really useful. Phonetic spelling, we talked about that. Remember the chaining, phonetic spelling strategies? That's a useful technique. And children will engage in simple narratives. They'll listen to you doing nice picture book stories, answering questions about it, and so on. And they'll maybe do some story retells, which is a lot of fun. You can actually you can give them pictures at different places in the story, have them line them up in order. And they're also toward the end of kindergarten, early first grade, depending on your curriculum, they're beginning to use capitalization and punctuation. That's where that rocket ship can be a really useful tool.
Love that.
In grades 2 through 3, uh, they're starting to get a bit more control. You're introducing for narratives, you can do sequential narrative. There are more complex narrative schemes, but it's not a bad place to start. And then your paragraph level writing, like expository writing, things like the tied paragraph, it really, or tree or whatever your mnemonic is, that comes in really well there. And then students are starting to move more from narrative into informational writing. They're not stopping their work on narrative, but they're adding this work on expository. And there's a lot, you're starting to experiment with more and more compound and complex sentence structures, which requires additional attention to like where do commas go? Uh, there's a little bit more emphasis on spelling then, and the kind of organization of your narrative. Is it following a sequence, or is your expository paragraph structured? And then grades 4 through 5, you're moving into that multi-paragraph level, um, more complex forms of logic that students are doing, a lot more control of grammar, vocabulary. Revision starts to be more and more important. With our students with dyslexia, when I have them earlier on and they're just beginning, I try to minimize the amount of rewriting they do because writing can be so painstaking, whether they're keyboarding or using a pencil. Many of them have fine motor difficulties with production that carry over into uh, keyboarding mistakes as well. So it's hard to get that information down. That's why oral practice with teacher transcription can be a useful tool. In some cases, text to speech, we're really just trying to get students expressing themselves, excuse me, speech to text. You're trying to get students expressing themselves. And then in the upper grades, we're moving to multi-paragraph essays. Again, logic starts to be more and more important, using multiple sources. It's not like with reading, moving from learning to reading to learn, and those upper phases where you're starting to entertain competing arguments and sort them out. Because writing and reading are intimately interwoven, as well as the listening and speaking that underlie, that sort of internal language. And then same goes on in high school as well. So that was a lot, but I knew it was an important question and it allowed me to revisit some of the concepts.
Well, and
Um,
you also just covered the question that so many people ask too about like what does on grade level writing look like? And we got that question so many times, and I was thinking, I need to know, So this is
yeah,
perfect. I mean, people always want some sort of scope and sequence, but I like these two slides kind of shows us what our students should be capable of doing, but also as a pathway for teachers, like these are the things we need to hit if we don't have a great or a reliable or, a research-backed writing curriculum. So I love these two slides. I will be studying them and putting them somewhere because this is really important. And you did cover a lot of questions in them.
well, thank you. I hope I think there were a number of the questions, the additional questions that people asked that where there were some sort of answers embedded for those.
Yes, for
Um,
sure.
and
One
technically our
question that I
time,
did love that I wanted to ask your
yeah,
opinion.
please go ahead.
Someone asked, and I thought it was so smart because so many of our, especially in middle and high school, and maybe even in upper elementary, depending, teachers that are ELA teachers are taxed with this writing. And it seems like we all know that we need to be writing in almost every subject. Kids are going to have to write in science and social studies. And how do we, especially when you are getting very grade content specific teachers, have you had any success or heard anything or seen? Um,
Yes. And let
Yay!
me
Tell
let me
us
share.
about
I
how
was
we get
so
these
happy to hear
content
that
area
because
teachers on board.
yeah, we did. I use the terms thematic and content centered often. You
Okay.
could substitute the word disciplinary because within different disciplines, there's different disciplinary language. Some of it is related to the topics that they're focusing on. So we're talking about subjects like social studies or history or these kind of very language heavy courses. Um, those have vocabulary and concepts in them. Creating word boxes around key vocabulary and concepts is a strategy that uh, upper grade level disciplinary teachers can be learning. Um, the idea of scaffolding paragraphs, the idea of helping students look for cohesive ties as they read through text. Okay, so if they're struggling to comprehend a certain kind of history text, can they um, uh, is there some kind of key word or phrase that seems to be recurring in that paragraph that seems really important? Um, Initially modeling for them how you do it, doing think aloud is a useful strategy. Uh, but compound and complex sentences are the meat and potatoes of upper grade school, and giving students strategies for that is a wonderful gift. And we found that in the Hanover schools, where I spent like 2.5 years working with teachers there, and I was working with middle school teachers and some early high school uh, teachers, and they got it. I mean, it was amazing. They said, "Oh, cool. I can just use a number of these strategies with my students." So yeah, it's good stuff, and it's not just limited to early grade school.
Right. Well, I know we're joined by a lot of literacy coaches and people that are doing this work in their school. And I just think it's important because a lot of times it's only the ELA teachers that are getting this training or getting this really good stuff. And we've got to share it with those content.
Absolutely. In fact, I think if I were to leave you with one idea that's really helpful is imagine a student, maybe they live in the same neighborhood throughout the course of their schooling. That's not always the case. Sometimes kids move to different districts, but imagine them moving through school from grade to grade. And what if the teachers knew what each other was doing? Like, do the middle school teachers know what the grade school teachers are doing? Do the high school teachers know what the middle school teachers are doing? Have we decided to hone in on this kind of core set of strategies that, they get more sophisticated as students move up into higher grades, but are we making sure that they're like creating boxes where they put kind of words? Are they reminding themselves to use cohesion circle? These concepts are relevant throughout school. So that imagining the child's lived experience going from one grade to the next is a really powerful tool. And we need to teach so that they don't kind of like just encounter a whole different set of concepts and ideas for how they're supposed to be writing each grade that they amble into.
Right.
That we're
I love
going,
that. I love
yeah,
that ideal vision. Let's do it. Let's take it from here.
and it
We heard it
works.
from you.
It works. Like if
Awesome.
you just decided on
We got to do it.
three things you were going to do across all
Yeah,
grades around writing,
I love
that's a
that.
powerful strategy.
All right. Well, you heard it here, guys. We're gonna get it cross curricular here. Thank you so much, Dr. Haynes, for joining us tonight. We are so appreciative of you using your time and your knowledge and your expertise in this area. And so many people are really, really trying to do better with writing instruction, and we know that we need to, especially with our kids that struggle with learning differences. So, your work and everything you taught us here tonight is so important. And on behalf of TRL Georgia and IDA Georgia, we are just so appreciative of you being here. I am going to speak to our participants, some of the little details. Let's see. If you have colleagues who missed tonight's webinar, let them know that all registrants will receive a link to the webinar recording, as well as the handout from Dr. Haynes tonight, which thank you. That's very generous. You'll also have an opportunity to fill out a knowledge check and request a certificate of attendance after you view the webinar here tonight or the recording. And that form will be sent to all the registrants early next week, and you have approximately 1 week to resubmit the completed form. When you fill out the form, you will receive your certificate of attendance. On behalf of the boards of IDA and TRL Georgia, we appreciate you attending the webinar this evening. Please join us in April for the last of the spring. We have a surprise pop-up one in September, but on April 22nd, we are welcoming Marianne Wolf. We're so excited. So please look on our social media sites and our websites of TRL Georgia and IDA Georgia to find that registration link for April 22nd. Again, Dr. Haynes, thank you so much for joining. We hope you'll
Thank
come
you.
back.
Oh, I love you folks and the work that you're doing, and I'm so happy to know that we've linked to so many people internationally on this,
No,
and
this is
just wanted to
amazing.
give a warm shout out to our friends and cousins and colleagues in different countries around the world.
Really cool. We really went international tonight. We're excited. Thank you for bringing that aspect. All right. Thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you on April 22nd. Good night.